He has a fascinating insight into what it means for the Eibishter to suspend everything so that he could give us what we deserve. What do you mean? Suspend everything? And what exactly is it that Hashem is going to give us? So where does this discussion begin? It's in our parasha this week, where the pasuk tells us, "Ufonisi aleichem." The Eibishter says, "I will turn to you, v'freisi eschem, and I will increase you, v'herbeisi eschem." And for now, we're just going to translate also as "I will increase you." We'll see that Rashi explains it differently, and the Rebbe will tell us why. So starting off with the first part of the pasuk, Pirush Rashi, "Ufonisi aleichem." Rashi says, what does it mean when Hashem says, "I will turn towards you"? Efne mikol hasokai, I will veer aside from all of my engagements, to repay your reward that you deserve. And then, as if we didn't get that, he explains, Moshel, what could you compare this to? To a king who hired a whole lot of workers. Rashi doesn't tell us anything further. As is explained in the Torah Kohanim, a little bit later, we'll see what the Torah Kohanim says, and we'll see how Rashi and the Torah Kohanim are not exactly sharing identical information. But before we get to that, let's first ask the high-level questions. Number one, what do we not understand about what Rashi is telling us, that the Eibishter will turn aside from all of his other engagements and he'll pay us our rewards? That Rashi had to refer us to a mashal. It's self-understood. The Eibishter is going to pause whatever he's doing and reward us. So what do we need a mashal for? Based on the other hand, let's just say that there was something that was unclear. So then you got to ask, so it's not clear, therefore you're using a mashal to clarify. How does the mashal actually add more insight, more understanding to the story? It actually sounds exactly the same thing. The king has all of his workers, and then he says to the workers, hang on a second, I'm going to deal with this specific worker. So it doesn't really seem to add any depth for us. Beyond that, the Ilba Parshas Achra, it's not the first time that Rashi has spoken along these lines, that the Eibishter pauses everything to deal with people. Earlier in Parshas Achra, the Gabi Sudam, where he talks about, the Torah tells us that we're forbidden to eat blood. And similarly, towards the end of Parshas Kedoshim, we were told that a person is not allowed to put their children through the ritual called Moilech, where they pass them through the fires. So Pirush Rashi al derech Pirush Kan. In both of those situations, Rashi gives commentary which is very similar to our commentary over here, except that it's on a negative message. So there the Torah says, "V'nosati ponai," that Hashem says, "I will place my face." Says Rashi, what does it mean ponai? Ponai shali, my time. I'm going to pause and turn away from everything else that I'm doing and deal with this particular individual. And to explain it in those situations, Rashi was very happy to just say that the Eibishter will stop what he's doing and he'll pay attention to us, and he didn't feel the need to give a mashal to explain what it is. So why here do we need a mashal, and especially when it doesn't seem like the mashal adds any further information? And then, let's just talk about the mashal itself for a second. Mashal gufa, halashim, what's the expression of the mashal? Mashal ma'adava domer. What can we compare this to? Lemelech shesocha poelim, a king who hired workers. You've got to explain that. It's not only kings who hire workers. And even when a king does hire workers, that's not something which is because of his stature and greatness as a king. Therefore, he has the opportunity to hire workers. You and I could do it as well. The reality is that any person could hire workers, and we do hire workers in practice. So the mashal should have said, that this is similar to a case of a person who employed a whole lot of people, and then he pauses whatever he's doing to give the appropriate reward to the outstanding worker who did more than all the other workers, as the mashal continues over the Torah Kohanim. So why does it have to be a king? So let's try an approach. Perhaps to answer this, we have to ask another question. Seeing as Rashi already in Parshas Achra and in Parshas Kedoshim already explained what V'nosati ponai means, that I turn my face, or a variation of the theme where Hashem says, I will turn my face. In both cases, Rashi told us that means that the Eibishter turns away from whatever he is doing and focuses on this particular individual. So the simple question is, why does Rashi have to explain something he has already explained? Because we know that Rashi doesn't do that. If he's already given us an explanation, he trusts that by the time we learn information that is similar, we'll remember what he's told us before. Especially when you consider that what Rashi is telling us in each of these cases is when it says something along the lines of, I will turn my face, it means I will turn my attention, I'll put aside whatever else I'm doing and focus on this. The truth is, you only really have to explain that if the word is ponai, my face. When you have the word face, Venosati ponai, Rashi has to explain, doesn't literally mean Hashem's face. It means ponai from the expression penai, my time, and he has to explain to us that it means that Hashem will divert his time and attention to this particular individual. But in our case, the Torah doesn't say ponai, it says ufonisi, I will turn aleichem to you. Is it not self-understood that means that the Eibishter will turn away from whatever else he was doing at the time, and he'll now turn to us? Who needs a mashal? Who needs an explanation at all? So once we try to answer that question, perhaps that will help us understand what's going on. So let's try and explain. In Parashas Achrei, where it told us not to eat blood, and then it said Menasati Ponai. And similarly, when we talk about the person who is warned against putting his children through the Moilech ritual, in both of those cases, Medubar bi Yochid, the Torah is talking about an individual, the individual who eats blood, the individual who puts their children through the Moilech ritual. So then you could understand that Eibishter says, I move my face, Penai Sheli, my time, that's actually a chiddush. That the Eibishter turns away from whatever else he's doing and diverts his attention to this individual. There Rashi would have to explain this, because that's surprising that the Eibishter would suspend the needs of the majority of the broader public in order to care for the specific attention to deal with this person who has transgressed. So there Rashi would have to explain it. Whereas in our parasha, here we're talking about the whole Jewish nation. The Eibishter says, I'm turning to all of you. So there you have the question. Then we have to answer, what's going on over here? That the Eibishter is going to stop doing everything he does to reward us? The engagement that the Eibishter has with us to reward us. For what? For doing Torah mitzvahs, which are integral to the entire purpose of creation. Is that not part of the Eibishter's focus? That he turns away from everything he's focused on to give us attention? That doesn't make sense. So maybe maybe that's why Rashi had to explain it again in our parasha, and specifically in our parasha. That even when the expression is that the Eibishter is going to turn to the whole Jewish people. And you would think that the focus on the Jewish people is already part and parcel of the main thrust of the Eibishter's engagement. Still, nevertheless, the Torah is still describing it as Hashem turning away from everything else that he does to be able to give us reward. Why would he do that? Why would it be that context? The Eibishter turning away from everything else as if we're not part of everything else. So to answer that, he'd bring the mashal compared to like the story of the king who had many workers, and now he turns his attention on the excellent worker, as explained in Teras Kehanim. And let's have a look. What does the Teras Kehanim say? That it's a king who hired many employees. And there was one of those employees who worked for days on end. In other words, he was really dedicated. All the workers came to get paid. And that outstanding worker came with them. So the king says, let me first deal with all the ordinary workers, and I'll pay them. And then I'll turn my attention to you, because you need special attention. Let's get rid of the riffraff, and we'll deal with the extraordinary person. And that would then translate into an imshal. The Jewish people request reward for us having served Hashem. As the other nations of the world also ask for their reward. So Hashem said to the Jewish people, I'm getting to you. Because everybody else is getting a very ordinary kind of reward, but you, the Jewish people, you're going to get a spectacular reward. So perhaps that's what Rashi wants to illustrate to us. That guess what? Yes, there's an asek of sharing the reward with the entire world, and then Hashem turns away from how he deals with everybody else to get to the unique way that he deals with us. And Mimosha Zemov, and that would then explain to us, number one, that Moshe would clarify that there are other worthy recipients of Hashem's reward, the other so-called workers. And that is part of the Eibishter's engagement. Number two, those other nations are like many different workers, whereas we, the Jewish people, are a single, and we could even say singular, special, unique worker. And thirdly, the reward to the rest of the world happens now in this world. I'm going to pay you now. Whereas the reward for the Jewish people is a spiritual reward for the next world. That's why now, I'm getting to you. We'll deal with you later. As the Mefarshim explain. So it sounds like a beautiful explanation, right? And I'll please move in Gam that will also help us to understand some of the questions we've raised about Rashi. Aleph, Shaloshin Efne Mikol Asokai. The idea of saying that Hashem turns away from all of the things that he's engaged with in order to give us attention, Mat'imo Gam Klape Aschar Shel Klal Yisrael. That does make sense when dealing with the reward for the Jewish people. Because when we talk about the Eibishter's responsibility, so to speak, or his engagement, part of that engagement is to reward everybody else who's out there. Whereas when it comes to repaying our reward, the Bnei Yisrael of the Jewish people, who get a schar b'fnei atzmoi she'eino doime l'chol hasokai. That is another category of reward that does not belong in the normal engagement of the Eibishter with the world. Therefore, the Eibishter's got to turn away from the normal engagement, and instead of engaging only in the here and now, to engage with something of lasting value that will be given to us in Olam Haba. And that would also explain why the Mashal is specifically about a king. Because who typically hires many servants, typically a king, so that all fits together. Now this is a beautiful explanation, and it makes absolute sense in the context of Torah's Kohanim, but it doesn't really work for Rashi. This explanation is not going to suit Rashi, whose entire approach is always the simplest understanding of the Pesukim. Sharei. Let's assume that this is what Rashi wanted to illustrate to us, that Eibishter is in the business of rewarding the entire humanity, and then he turns away from that. Okay, you're the people to get your reward in this world. Let's look at the special, outstanding servant, the Jewish people, and give their reward in the next world. Rashi, if that's what Rashi wanted to tell us, then he would have quoted from the Torah's Kehanim, the continuation, because that's critical. That helps give us the context. That there were many workers, and then there's the one worker who's unique. Or at the very least, he should have indicated that there are many workers, not just the one. Because that is fundamental to this particular explanation, that the Eibishter's Asek is a whole lot of workers, and then he pulls out the one. It's certainly not a very clear explanation just to put in etc. and then so go look it up in Torah's Kohanim. And therefore, we have no option but to say that really the key element that Rashi needs to address, that the Eibishter turns away from whatever else he's doing so as to give us reward. Kvar nimtzo b'tei b'shehetek Rashi. All of that is clearly expressed in the words that Rashi did quote from the Torah Kahanim, which are Moshel l'maha Davidim l'melech shesochar poyanim. That you'll understand it from the moshel of a king who hired workers. And the other details that follow later in Torah Kahanim, that there were many workers and one was outstanding. Those parts of the story are not going to add insight into our understanding of this particular pasuk, which is why Rashi was happy with an etc. The words Rashi has quoted, those are the words that are key for us understanding what the messages of turning from everything the Abishah is doing in order to give us reward. Now, before we can get to unpack that fully, we need to see what Rashi says next about the next part of the pasuk. So then, the next thing Rashi is going to do is explain the words "v'freis eschem," which I'll cause you to be fruitful. Says Rashi, that means bepiria verivya, literally to be able to have, please God, many children. Then he says v'herbeisi eschem, which means I'll multiply you. There Rashi doesn't translate it as you would expect. He explains that you'll stand with upright stature. Obvious question, right? We have to understand. In Parashas Bereshis, Rashi said the word peru, which means be fruitful, mashmoi means echad moilid echad v'lo yoser, that one person gives birth to one person, and say who? Urevu, the fact that it is immediately followed by the word and multiply. Fruitful means that a person has a child. Multiply means she'echad moilid harbe, that one person could become the ancestor of many, many others. So they themselves could have more than one child, and their children have more than one child. So how come over here does Rashi now seem to say something very different to Bereshis, where under the word vehifresi, which is like the word peru, to be fruitful, he includes the word verivya, and not under the word vehirbesi, which seems to make a lot of sense. So the Mefarshim point out that Rashi could not give the same explanation here as he does in Bereshis, mishum shepru levad hu b'teva habriya v'lochein einei bracha, because the idea of having children, peru, having one child, is natural. There's no special bracha in that. But here our parasha is talking about special, unique brachas that Hashem is promising the Jewish people. In other words, things that are not natural. The Mefarshim say Vefresi has to mean that an ordinary person, Peru, would just have one child, and yet the bracha is even at that stage he'll already have many more. So naturally then Vehibesi can't just be more quantity, because then you're just repeating the same bracha again and again, and the Riba Beichis Bekumas Kufa must mean that there's some qualitative bracha that is shared at this point, which is we'll have this great stature in the world. That's how the Mefarshim explain it. But it's not clear. The idea of one person having more than one child is not unique to the Jewish people. You see that in the nations of the world as well. They also have growth rates. So what exactly is the bracha to say that you will be fruitful and multiply and have many, many children? What's so unique about this? So now, to understand all of this, we've got to find the core issue that Rashi is bothered by. The difficulty with understanding the words in the pasuk that say, and I will turn my attention towards you. What's difficult about it? Okay, so what's our go-to explanation? Let's explain like we said in Parashas Achrei, that David turns his attention from everything else that he's doing and now focuses on us. That David is going to turn his attention and give us reward. So that might be valid, but if that's the case, that should have been stated right at the beginning of the parasha. Straight after the words that say, if you will follow my statutes, and you'll guard my mitzvahs, and you'll do them, then, as an introduction to all of the other brachas that are going to come in the parasha, it should have said, If you do that, I'll turn to you and give the brachas that are about to follow. Alternatively, it should have been the last thing that was stated, right at the end of all of the brachas, as the summary. Like both in Parshas Achim and Kedoshim, where it tells us first what the person does wrong, and then it says, and Hashem turns to them. So what's unusual about this pasuk is not just the words. In the case of Achrei Mois and Kedoshim, it's the words that caught Rashi's attention. Over here, it's the placement of the words also that catches attention. The fact that the Torah stuck these words of in the middle of the description of specific brachas, and various types of rewards that we'd get for Torah mitzvahs, that would make you think that the words of Fanisa Aleichem in this parasha you would think it doesn't mean that I'll turn my attention to you, because logic would say, I'll turn my attention to you and do the following. Or logic would say, I'll do all of the following because I've turned my face to you. And the fact that it's part of a list of a whole lot of brachas and a whole lot of rewards for doing Torah mitzvahs makes you think that maybe this is also a unique reward that you get for Torah mitzvahs. That's why Rashi has to explain. Even in our parasha, where the placement of these words does seem odd, the meaning of these words is still that I'm going to turn away from everything else that I'm engaged with and give you your reward. Why then put it in the middle? The reason that statement was inserted in the middle of a list of different brachas and types of reward, and not at the beginning, that's what Rashi qualifies for us by giving us the mashal of the king. Now, before we get there, we need to think for a moment, what's the difference between when you and I hire workers versus when the king hires workers? You see, we didn't stop to think about that. Does a king have to pay his workers? The fact that ordinary people, even people who have very high rank in the government, have to hire people to work for them, and they have to pay for it, we understand. Because you can't force somebody to work for you, so you have to pay them. There has to be incentive. Why does a king doesn't have that problem that he has to pay? Seeing as the king is the ruler, every citizen is obligated to do whatever the king tells them, payment or not. Move on, so straight away that should make you think if the king is paying these workers, it must be that the king is getting them to do something they are not obligated to do, either for the king or for the benefit of the country. Because all of that would have already been done before he had to now go and hire people. Anything the king needs, anything the country needs, should be taken care of by the citizens of the country under the king's instruction. So now that he's paying people to work, that tells you it must be that whatever these particular jobs are not critical to the sustainability of the country or to the needs of the king. So therefore, the only way to ensure that these tasks would be done, you got to pay these people to get the work done, and not only pay, you might even have to pay top dollar, because it's not a job they have to do. And that's where Rashi is telling us the Torah goes in this parasha. Because what is this parasha? The parasha starts off with Bechukosai, Shem Mashmoi, which means what? Pirish Rashi, as Rashi himself tells us, it doesn't just simply mean doing mitzvahs. Shetiu amelim b'Torah. It means that people toil in learning Torah. In other words, the They don't just learn Torah according to the allocation of how much Torah a Jewish person is required to study. But they're toiling in Torah. They're pushing themselves to learn beyond what the requirements of Torah learning are. The same thing about keeping mitzvahs. That what is the definition of mitzvahs tishmoru? That you should exert yourself in Torah learning so that you can keep mitzvahs in the best way possible. This type of observance of Torah mitzvahs, which is beyond the strict requirements of the Torah, that would be the equivalent of people who are being hired by the king because what they're being asked to do, they're not obligated to do. Because they're going to do work that an ordinary citizen is exempt from doing. That's this parasha, about when Jewish people go beyond the requirement of the law to invest in Torah and to keep mitzvahs at the highest standard. It is self-understood that if we push ourselves to do Torah and mitzvahs in a way that is more than required, then obviously the reward that we get is more than expected. And that would explain why the words that Hashem's going to turn his attention are placed in the middle, not as an introduction or conclusion to the parasha with the list of all the rewards. Because seeing as we've now defined Bechukosai as going beyond the requirements of Torah to invest and exert oneself in Torah. So obviously, that would then include, obviously, if you keep Torah as much as you should. If we're dealing with people who are learning more Torah than they should, well, obviously, then they've also learned as much as they had to. Because as the pasuk says, and you will keep the mitzvahs, which includes all the mitzvahs, and one of the mitzvahs is to learn Torah, so that would be included. So in other words, by virtue of the fact that we're dealing over here with the Jewish people are learning Torah and applying themselves to mitzvahs beyond the requirement, the Jews now deserve two different kinds of reward. The first reward that they deserve is for discharging their responsibility to learn Torah as required. So for that, you should get entry-level reward. Then, in addition to that, they should have a special reward for exertion in Torah, for keeping Torah mitzvahs beyond what is expected. And that's exactly what you're going to see in the parasha. They promise two kinds of reward. First, the parasha is going to tell us, you keep Torah mitzvahs as required, you get the simple, so to speak, entry-level rewards. Normal rewards, expected rewards. Generally speaking, it's kind of represented by the idea of getting rain at the right time, which means pretty much you have what you need. And after describing that ordinary, accessible, expected reward, in the middle of the conversation, then the Torah says, and guess what? Beyond that, there's another class of reward which is coming to the Jewish people, not for having done the bare minimum, but because they push themselves beyond what is required and they completely invested in Torah, and therefore they turns to them. I know, in other words, that when responding to that degree of avodas Hashem, where we exert ourselves, for that we get a far higher, superior kind of reward, and that is described as they were turning away from everything else and focusing on us. So, let's start with the first kind of reward. Where we do exactly what is expected of us, and therefore we get the reward that we would expect to receive. You can't call that the Eibishter turning away from everything usual to reward us. Because that's actually a normal experience that even the non-Jews of the world can access. They do what is expected of them. They keep the 7 Noachide laws, and for that they get the reward that is coming to them. Which incidentally would also include learning those areas of halacha that are directly relevant to their lives as non-Jewish people. So they get reward and we get reward. It's not identical, but it's the same class of reward. Reward for doing what you're supposed to. But when it comes to the unique, totally different reward, which is for the person who invests and exerts in learning Torah, which is comparable to the king who had to hire people because what they're doing is beyond what they're required to do, that is not accessible to the rest of the world. In then we could say that the Eibishter turns away from everything, including reward to Jewish people. In the ordinary category, he's got to turn away from that to this unique category of overwhelming reward. You'll ask, but Rashi refers, like in the Teres Kehanim, to a king who hired many workers. Which implies that there are other workers, not only the Jewish worker, who had to be paid, and our whole premise is that if you have to be paid, it means it's something you don't have to do. That would translate that would imply that even non-Jewish people can serve Hashem in a way that is beyond the requirement, for which they should deserve unique, special reward. So it's true. There's the possibility. That's because there's a small fraction of the non-Jewish world who are the righteous amongst the nations, who do go beyond what is required of them. But it's important to note, as the Mashal does note, even when they push themselves beyond the black and white of their requirements, it comes nowhere near to the real greatness of the Jewish people when they exert themselves in Torah. And therefore the very unique attitude that the Eibishter takes only to the Jewish people is, when it comes to rewarding us for our Bechukosai, our super dedication, is that the Eibishter turns away from everything that exists, including reward for the Chassidim Masoilam, to give us what we need. It's the Eibishter changing channels to a totally different kind of reward, which is even beyond the special bonus reward for Chassidei Umasoilam. So what's Rashi telling us? There are 2 steps to the reward. Regular reward for regular avodah, and then in the middle we switch tracks to the unique reward, which is only for unique avodah. In that unique reward there's vehifreisi, vehirbesi. Now we can understand why Rashi explains those words as he does. Now we understand why when Rashi gets to the word vehifreisi, he already says vehifreisi is periya verivya. Why? Because we already know at that point that we are now discussing the kind of reward which is over the top, unbelievable reward, not finite by the book. This is now a very special engagement from the Eibishter to us, where he turns away from everything else so as to give us this opportunity. And that's only this is exclusive to the Jewish people. So then so you can't now say vehifreisi is periya, one adult has one child. Vehirbesi is rivya, that one parent has many children. As we said before, such a bracha is not unique to the Jewish people. Therefore, says Rashi, it must be that already at the moment when the Eibishter says you will be fruitful, that is already a unique kind of bracha, which is completely out of the ordinary, and is the result of this unique attention that Hashem directs towards us. Therefore, Rashi immediately says, just that word of Eifresi on its own is loirak piria kim gamarivya. It's not only one-to-one growth, it's one-to-many growth. Echad moilid harbe. One person has many children. Pirushat dvarim, which means shaloi zeibel bachatevis v'Eifresi koileles beis habrachos de piria v'rivya. Rashi is telling us much more than just the fact that this word means multiple children and grandchildren, etc. To tell us, first the person will have one child, and subsequently they'll have more. Rashi is telling us, it's not just a conglomerate of two brachas in one word, it's a fundamentally different kind of bracha of Pirya. The message is that the kind of Pirya in this scenario is Rivya. What does that mean? In the rest of the world, Peru, the word Peru, the concept of Peru, the biological process of Peru, is one child from one adult. And it's possible that that one child may not have the opportunity to birth other children. Could be infertile. Whereas when the same word v'freisi is applied to the Jewish people, the implication is that the moment that one child is born, that child is guaranteed to also be able to be fertile. The bracha is that this one child will create an unbroken chain throughout history, which we've already seen earlier in history. As it says by Avram, what does the Eibishter say to Avram Avinu? There's that word, I will increase his seed. What will I give him? Ben Yochidus Yitzchak, one child, Yitzchak. And even though it's one child, that one child is already called Rivya. That's what Rashi says. V'hifreisi means that both Pirya and Rivya, the one child will have this potential of many more children already from the beginning, a guarantee of fertility. How could David say it to Avraham Avinu? Because even though Yitzchak was one son to Avraham Avinu, Yitzchak's lineage is a huge amount of people. And needless to say, if the guarantee is that every one child that is born is effectively a fountain of fertility, then you can be assured that they'll definitely have the bracha that you'll have more than one child yourself, because that even the non-Jewish world could have. So now Rashi says, if the word v'ifreisi, as we've just explained, has to automatically already include a tremendous growth in quantity, so then you have no choice. Then the next word can't be even more increase in quantity, because that would be superfluous. Must mean a different kind of increase, a qualitative increase, like we said before. And putting it back into the context that David is giving a unique reward for a unique dedication, so it must be a unique bracha. Therefore Rashi explains, what does it mean? It will have great stature. Which means not only will we have the fulfillment of the promise that the Navi already gave to Rivka Imenu, that the younger brother would dominate the older brother Esav would serve the younger, and beyond that, by virtue of the fact that David gives the special attention to the younger brother, which is the Jewish people, in our Tzor, not only will it be a Tzor, younger, junior brother that yet has the senior, older, bigger, larger, stronger brother serving him, but he'll actually become the greater brother. But there's still one little issue that we have to resolve, and that is the language that Rashi uses. Miloshin Rashi, when Rashi says, Efnani mikol asokai l'shalom scharchem. He says, I will turn away from all of my work to reward you. And rather than saying, I will turn away from everything else that I'm doing and focus my attention on you, that implies that still raises the question that it sounds now like the unique reward that the Eibishter gives us for doing a Meilim B'Torah, real dedication to Torah, is actually not part of the Eibishter's so-called focus. So why, in fact, would rewarding the Jewish people not qualify as part of the Eibishter's, so to speak, occupation? To that we have to answer as follows. The idea of Hashem turning to us Ufonisi Aleichem means that something is happening at that point in time that is altogether deeper than whatever happens when the Eibishter is oisek, when the Eibishter is, so to speak, engaged with the world. What does that mean? So let's understand what's asek. So let's understand what is the deeper meaning of this concept asek, engagement, occupation. What does it really mean? If you're talking about a human here on earth, if a person is occupied, it basically means I am I, who is currently occupied in something outside of myself. It's occupying me. It's taking up my time and attention. It's not me. In other words, which means at the time that a person is occupied with a particular way of working or doing things, at that point the person is not themselves. You're not, so to speak, engaging with their essence. That's how it is in humans. And this could be applied loosely to how it is with the Eibishter, so to speak. Fundamentally, the Eibishter cannot be shared, revealed, brought down into our reality. It's not possible. It's beyond revelation. It's beyond definition. It's beyond expression. So any time that the Eibishter is sharing with the world, giving to the world, empowering the world, it's the Eibishter being occupied with an external concept. And we could say the reason is because the source of all of these brachas and all of the founding and running of the world is all from elements of Kedusha, which are the product of the Eibishter rather than the essence of the Eibishter. Now we can understand why the Eibishter says, I'm going to turn away from everything that is an occupation. I am going to turn to you. That I am occupied with, you I'm going to turn to. The concept of the entire existence which happens at every nanosecond of all of the worlds, right up to the highest spiritual realm. Even the concept of reward and punishment as it ordinarily plays out, even with regards to Jewish people, all of that is purely what the Eibishter is willing to share with us. Like, for example, we say about Gan Eden, that Gan Eden is where neshamas appreciate and enjoy Ziv HaShechina, the radiance of the Shechina, not unbridled godliness, a radiance, a glimmer of the Eibishter's greatness. So therefore, all of that can fit into the broad category of asokai, the things that I step out of my truest self in order to engage. Every one of those things, the existence of the world, reward and punishment, even for the Jewish people, they're all a matter of how Hashem diminishes his infinite essence into a particular mold to affect a particular But the moment the Jewish people served the Eibishter, how? Through exertion and toil, and push themselves beyond themselves, much more than what we are instructed to do. Meaning, which means we're not doing the mitzvahs as something that occupies us, something external that we commit ourselves to, using specific tools at our disposal, many of which may in fact be more external or superficial. We're talking about a melim, where a person is totally invested with the depth of self in this particular learning of Torah or doing of mitzvahs. Which is why the person is doing more than necessary, because they're invested. They're not on the clock. They're not doing a 9 to 5. They're not working for an employer. This is them. This is what they care for. The Eibishter always responds to us in line with how we behave. For that, that arouses from the Eibishter that the Eibishter will turn himself towards us. Meaning, HaKadosh Baruch Hu poine l'adam ze b'pnimi usoyo ve'atzmiyusoy. That means that the Eibishter is now going to turn the essence of his being in the direction of this person, a dimension of Eibishter which is the true God, beyond anything that is shared, defined, explained, revealed. I'm going to turn away from everything that fits into the category of asek, everything that fits into the category of external, of radiated, of shared, which allows the opportunity for true oneness between we, the people, and Hashem. You could take it even one step further. The parameters of a created being should be v'chinas mekabel. A created being has to be a recipient in order to exist. Recipient of energy. Recipient of the Eibishter's choice that they should exist. That applies right after the highest possible creations that exist. And it even applies to the greatest energies that possibly exist. All of them, in the most general sense, are recipients of something greater than themselves. So even a very powerful or, there has to be a ma'or, a source of light that they are mekabel from, that they get their energy from. And therefore, even in a scenario where a higher, more developed energy or being gives influences or vitalizes something lower, it's not a true mashpia, because they're essentially just a conduit. They're receiving a huge amount of energy and transferring it. So, for example, if you have a substation, it's not the source of energy for the electricity in your home, because it's receiving from the power station. So even though relative to us it looks like a mashpia, it's giving us power, the reality is it doesn't have power of its own. It's reliant on the power at the original power station to, so to speak, give it life. The truest mashpia, giver, source that relies on zero input from the outside, is only Hashem at Hashem's essence. Therefore, as long as any of us only learns Torah and does mitzvahs as required, then we are receiving. There's an instruction. That's what guides and empowers us. So we act based on the input of that instruction. We receive the Eibishter's directive, and then we follow it. But if a person engages in Torah learning beyond what is required, then the person is not just getting a list of instructions and following them. The person is actually contributing. The fact that they're using their own talents, abilities, choices, volition. At that point, the person becomes creator-esque. At that moment, here on earth, that human being is reflecting the essence of who they are, which is an neshama rooted in the essence of Hashem. And therefore they elicit the kind of response and reward which comes from Hashem's essence. What's the greatest reward? That the Eibishter's essence turns towards and connects with them. So what does it play out in? Says Rashi, Pirya Verivya, the ability to share, to create new life, not just to share to an existing recipient, but to create the recipient. Even though, in addition to the fact that generally in Hasidus, we say the capacity to give birth, to produce new life, is something that relies on the power of the infinite. But when we're talking about a very unique context, with Abish just turning his essence towards the person, then every brocha has infinite potential. The pirya is pirya virivya, like we said before. Where every single individual birth is actually the potential for an unlimited amount of births still to come. But there's still something we need to understand, because later on in the brochas, after the Eibishter said that he's going to turn his attention to us, then the pasuk starts talking about like really tangible physical things. Now you've just said that Eibishter's essence is being shared with us, and it's this amazing beyond the realm of all asek. And now you start telling me, and there's going to be this good thing and that good thing. How do you link it? How do you link more money in the bank account, or crops, or whatever the physical brachas might be? How do you link that back to Hashem's essence? So this is a critical issue. If we were discussing here that the Eibush is going to give us spiritual energies, each of which might be completely infinite, or at the very least, the Eibush is going to reveal elements of bracha or divine energy, whatever it is, to us. You'd say, okay, listen, the Eibush is sharing things which are so sublime and so esoteric and so unfettered. Obviously, they can't fit into our world. The only way in is that that have to be filtered, that have to be downgraded, that have to be dumbed down. If that were the case, then in that reality where higher there's more revelation, and lower the revelation had to be dumbed down, then the greater the brocha, the more you would expect to see godliness, because you're on a scaled environment. Higher up, greater than my place, is more God to see. But that's not what we're discussing here. Here we're discussing the Eibishter's essence, which has no definition or limits that you could apply to it. Therefore, this is a bracha that can even appear as, and maybe dafka appears as, physical. To be expressed in physical goodness that has no limits, which is the Eibishter's atzmos, which is not locked into amount, so it's all a bracha in the world, and it's not locked into how it presents itself, so it doesn't have to be locked into the spiritual world. It can be tachlis, things that we need in our lives, because it's Hashem's essence. Now you might say that's still not clear, because yes, it might be acceptable to believe and to understand that when you're talking about Hashem's essence, there are no rules to limit where and how it could manifest, so it could manifest in tremendous physical goodness. How does that come anywhere close to what we're saying? The Eibishter turning to us, which means that that the concept is that we and Hashem become one. So how does that relate to having more money in the bank, or a fancier car, or whatever the other brachas might be? Number 2, Beis, Even when it talks about the Eibusha directing his full essence towards us, linking us with his essence, Rashi still calls it reward, your reward. Still defines it in the concept of reward. Doesn't the word schar imply that somebody did work for which they deserve payment or reward? Which must mean that the payer and the payee, the employer and the employee, the king and the worker are obviously not the same. Otherwise, how do you pay from one to the other if you're both the same? Doesn't make sense. Let's go back to what we tried to debunk. If you were talking about rewards that David is going to give us, which are all in a calibrated, rated level of how much God reveals, then as we know, no amount of additional revelation will ever expose Hashem's essence. It will just be more revelation. All revelation could put us in touch with is the Eibishter in a state of sharing, which means in a state of limiting, like we know in ourselves. The more you explain to somebody, and the better they're understanding what you're saying, still means you're in the state of sharing, giving, not in the state of making you me. So it wouldn't be possible, just like Giloyim cannot reveal godliness, they can't make us one with Hashem. But we're not describing that, right? We're describing this linkage of Hashem turning his essence to us. How can you use the word schar? Works for Gilui. So, the answer to that is, the truth is that even when you discuss this avodah of toiling and exerting ourselves in Torah, which, as we've said earlier, Mitzad, Pnimius v'atzmis hanefesh, is an expression of the deepest part of our neshama, still, Yeshnam Beis Eifanim, there's still two ways in which this could play out. Aleph. One way is, it's possible that the person has reached a point where the essence of his neshama is guiding and motivating his behavior. That's why he's doing much more than he has to. But he still has a particular goal and aspiration, which is the person wants to be one with Eibishter. That's why he's trying and pushing so hard. In that case, because the person has a personal agenda that is part of the process, that implies that there's still a little bit of self, which is not one with Hashem's essence. The fact that he wishes to be one with Hashem's essence, that is something that exists and lives inside it. One possibility. Second possibility is a person's dedication to Hashem has no personal considerations, no personal aspirations. Not even the motivation, I want to be one with Hashem. As great an ideal that is, that's not even the aspiration. Why is this person doing Torah mitzvahs with tremendous engagement and involvement? Because that's what the Eibishter wants. So there can be no restrictions. A person who is capable of doing that, just dedication, only what the Eibishter wants, I have no personal vested interest, such a person can touch and experience the Eibishter's essence. Because there are two possible ways that a person could have this tremendous degree of dedication, therefore it is possible there could be two ways of the Eibishter, so to speak, turning towards them. As long as a person is working in the first way, which means I want to be one with Hashem. That's what's driving me. I want to be one with Hashem. That leaves a person, that leaves self in the mix. The wish to be one with Hashem. As long as that happens, gam kiyum ufonisi aleichem, even when the Eibishter turns to that person, and the Eibishter creates this incredible bond with that Jew and Hashem's essence via their tremendous work in Torah. It will happen in such a way that the person will still identify themselves independently. So you could still call it a reward. The person who identifies as separate from Hashem's essence gets the reward of being connected to the essence. And that's why the Torah will then go into a whole lot of gashmistic rewards, because there is still the possibility of this person's self-awareness. We could still consider the fact that the person has needs, including physical needs, and they have to be provided. When a person reaches ultimate avodas Hashem, without any need for a particular outcome or without any particular aspiration, then the Eibishter's response to that person is perfect. That's alluded to at the end of the parasha, where the Eibishter says, I will lead you upright. Koimemius is a double expression of upright. That the so-called stature of the Eibishter, and the stature of the Jewish people, become one and the same stature. The Jews and the king, the Eibishter, are absolutely